Welcome to the Founder Factor, where we dig into the strategies, ideas, and mindsets of some of South Carolina's most impactful entrepreneurs. So today on the show, we are joined by Peter Micali, who's going to bring us a little bit of a different perspective than usual as the Startup Success Program Manager at Next. Well, thanks for being on the show. Did I say your title right?
I appreciate it. Yes, it's a bit of a mouthful. Probably an easier way of describing it is just I'm a concierge for startups. I'm focused on interacting with startups and helping them in our community.
I should have said that. That was much easier.
Maybe that's what the title should be, but that's okay.
So what does that look like now in your role with Next?
Sure. Yeah. So I joined the team late February, early March, and Next is an organization. We're an entrepreneurship support organization in Greenville, but we're focused on the upstate. And as a startup success program manager, my day-to-day is usually pretty different, but it includes any number of the following. Interacting with one-on-one startups to a certain extent, providing consulting, but obviously I'm not an expert in all things. So it's more about kind of wayfinding, pointing them in the right direction, connecting the resources that either Next provides directly or the ecosystem at large can provide. So kind of a first stop for where you might go eventually.
Okay. And how did you get to this point? What's your backstory?
It's a bit convoluted, but I'll try to keep it brief. I'm a Greenville native. I left to go to undergrad in Chicago and was actually a film major.
Oh, wow.
And to kind of point that out, just to say, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew that I liked, creative, but also the business side of things. So that led me to a career in advertising and marketing. So I did that for a number of years between Chicago and Atlanta, but most recently lived in Boston and worked within the entrepreneurial ecosystem up there. So that included working for a more mature startup that was further along and about to become publicly traded. And it also included working for a two-person startup as a co-founder. Spoiler alert, we didn't retire off of that, but at the same time, it was a wonderful experience, which then led me to work at Mass Challenge, which is a global startup accelerator.
Okay.
And that's kind of where I really fell in love with the support aspect of helping entrepreneurs and their companies succeed.
Okay. And I feel like a lot of people are pretty familiar with the idea of VCs, but can you explain the accelerator model for any of our listeners who?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. Obviously, there's a ton of different types of support that you can get as an entrepreneur. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. There's good actors, there's bad actors. But there are some structured programs that are a little bit, I wouldn't say new to our area, but obviously more like established markets like Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston. There are a number of accelerators and incubators. And it gets, you split hairs a little bit when describing the differences between them. But typically speaking, for an accelerator, there's some kind of, time-bound element of you're in a cohort or you're in a class. There's a start date, there's an end date. Many of them will take equity or a financial, element up front that you have to pay to be in it. Mass Challenge happened to be a nonprofit accelerator that took no equity. And so it was truly focused on early stage and supporting them. But within that program, there was a lot of programming focused on typical stuff that an entrepreneur might encounter, probably pretty similar to what you guys are talking about with the Founder Factor, in the sense of, having a class on marketing and branding and having workshops on, setting up your company for investment and how to pitch to investors. But then there's also kind of that intangible element of the network of, at least how Mass Challenge worked and to a certain extent Next as well. There's the official, okay, I'm now a company that's going through Mass Challenge. I get the following things. But then the other side of that is, okay, now you're a member of all the alumni that have gone through that, all the volunteers and mentors, of which some of them are very influential in the city of Boston in this case, volunteering their time and trying to help. So it really is, it's providing the support based on the stage of the company, I would say, is kind of the usual defining factor. But then obviously there's also more focused accelerators out there or incubators or even, sometimes they're calling them like venture labs where it's hyper focused on, okay, I'm only working with software development
like
companies.
Healthcare or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So through, it's called Mass Challenge, right?
Yes.
Mass Challenge. And through Next and other endeavors you've been a part of, what are some of those main challenges that you're seeing entrepreneurs run into and then helping them with?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think, in general, I think a lot of times, especially for first-time founders or anyone who's new to the space, there is that kind of imposter syndrome element of I'm doing this for the first time. I don't know what I don't know. And so I think that having a sounding board at the bare minimum, or having somebody to meet with to say, where do I go next? Like, what do I do? Not everyone's going to have the right answer, and every audience has a different take on that. I always, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you're talking to, the financial side of the equation, it's going to be focused on that element. But I think what I encounter a lot, and especially in our region, as we're kind of, in the earlier stages and building up, is kind of that I don't know if I am doing this the right way or not. That I think is another element of where accelerators and other types of organizations like that come into play is how do we make sure we're all at a level playing field, and how do we make sure that we're all speaking the same language so that Greenville can punch above its weight and seem as advanced or as mature as something. Our most immediate example might be Atlanta, but one day, who knows? Like, how can we get our startups to that level? So I know it's a long, rambling answer, but knowing where to go, I think, and how to approach this is a common element for first-time founders.
And you mentioned the right way in your eyes. Is there a right way?
I don't know if there's a right way to start a company. I think that you could search on Google right now what constitutes a startup. You're going to get different answers from some of the most prominent, thinkers in this space. And what, Techstars views as being the right way to do a company is probably a little bit different than Y Combinator, which is different from Mass Challenge, which is, but I think that surrounding yourself with experts that can do, their field of work and help provide you with the guidance and the resource you need. The number one thing I always see is that time and time constraints are a big issue for entrepreneurs, because if you're the only member or the only employee of your company, you're doing everything, you have no time. And so finding the right sort of help, and from the right, the good actors, the people that can provide that support, the content like this, I think that informing yourself and educating yourself with, experts' opinions, that's the right way to go about doing things. And then to that end, I would say that there is a lot of great free stuff online. I mean, you can go and see what does Y Combinator say about, their philosophy on a pitch deck. Start there. Like, start from established, parameters that people have already, done. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but that is a good place to start. So I know it's a long-winded answer. I hope I answered your question.
No, you definitely did. And yeah, you're definitely right in terms of there are some like component pieces that I think you can reuse. You don't have to reinvent the wheel with every single thing, but definitely it seems that how you assemble all those pieces is that's where you get the differences business to business,
And to that point, business to business, what makes sense for the best journey for, a B2B SaaS company is going to be different than what it is for a nutrition company. But I do think that, finding the right free resources and knowing when to kind of deploy and when to pay for things and when to kind of expand, I think that's hard. But that's where you can find support either in your fellow entrepreneurs, in finding mentors, going through an entrepreneurship support organization like Next, but there's tons of other ones in town. There's a number of ways, but I think all of that ladders up to the notion of there being an ecosystem. And I think that's what's most important. It's what Next and what I care about is, yes, there's what Next does, but then Greenville as a whole, we have by some counts, 50 plus support organizations that provide different types of support.
Wow,
whether
really?
it be, we have a minority business accelerator in town. We have, early stage startup support in the form of Greenville Starts and Furman and the Hill Institute. We have Flywheel, which is in North Carolina, co-working early. There's a number of resources. So I think one of the big things is making sure that we're all connecting with each other. And that way, if we have entrepreneurs that are seeking specific support, we can direct them in the right direction, even if it's not for that particular organization that you might work for.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, what are you seeing in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, so to speak, in Greenville versus some of the other places you've lived?
Yeah. So, I mean, the bulk of my entrepreneurial experience would be in Boston. And to a certain extent, some of it was in Atlanta and Chicago, but I would focus on Boston. Boston is obviously just a little bit further ahead and more mature, which a number of places are, but I don't mean that to say that we are lesser than. It's just a more of a matter of time. And so Boston now over time has moved from being, by some accounts, it's like, okay, New York and the West Coast, those are great hubs. Boston wanted to compete with them. But over time, not only do they compete with them, because of the unique assets they have in their regions, such as world-class universities and hospitals, they now have this vertical focus almost on life sciences. So I think that, Greenville is kind of in that nascent early stage of, we've had some successes. A lot of them are kind of unheard of, and we kind of have to do more to surface those and say, wow, that company raised how many dollars, and now they're doing, they've made how many jobs? Like, we don't even know. We have to surface those stories. But I think that from what I've seen, we have a lot of really great ideas and capable people of really creating some awesome impact in our region. It's just a matter of how do we do that initial kind of ecosystem building, which is hard and intangible. And, it might make people roll their eyes a little bit because it sounds like fluff, but I believe in it in the sense of there is a point to it. And it's kind of like we're all working together to make sure that it's obvious where to get help or what type of help you can get. And so, long story short, I think Greenville has a ton of potential. I think everyone knows how much the city and the region has grown in terms of being a tourist destination and being kind of a national city that deserves attention. But now we need to get to that stage where startups are on equal footing in that regard of it's as appealing to an entrepreneur to start a business here because they know they're going to get the support and the resources and the talent they need to do so. Yeah.
What do you think, what is Greenville's or the upstate's like special sauce?
I think, I hesitate on that because I don't want to limit us in some respects. And it's like, not that, by no means is Boston limited by having a world-class like life sciences element to their city. But I think historically as a state, we've focused a lot on manufacturing and, to a certain extent, I would say life sciences as well, particularly from some of our research universities. But, I think that's an area of opportunity for us is as we, move into, some manufacturing, I don't know what number they're on now, if it's 3.0 or 4.0 or 5.0, as we go there, what are additional value adds that we can do? What are some technology focused, elements? I've seen some really awesome AI companies in town. There's a lot of stuff I think that might surprise people here in terms of saying, oh, I know them as being, manufacturing and textile focused. And some of what's cool here is still related to that, but it's like light years beyond it. I think the other element that we have that's unique to us is that, if I think about the public side of things and saying, Greenville's a great place to visit and it's a great place to live, we have a lot of those intangible things that would attract a company or talent here that we can now capitalize on and say, please start your business here or please keep it here because we're doing everything we can. And that's in conjunction with, that's not next when I say we, I mean, our government officials, our organizations like Upstate Alliance. There's a lot of groups that are doing what they can to kind of advertise our region. We just have to make sure that the structural support is there for startups to flourish. All
right, we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
You've been listening to The Founder Factor. We'll see you back in a sec. This podcast is brought to you by Designly, South Carolina's top-rated app development company, and Word of Web, your partner in smarter website strategy and design. Welcome back to The Founder Factor. We're here talking with Peter Micali.
Thank you.
So digging back in here, I thought we'd switch gears a bit and dig into more your personal experience on the entrepreneurial side of things, not, with Next overseeing and helping and mentoring other entrepreneurs, but, being one yourself. So you were a co-founder of a business a while back. Was that the one in, what city was that in?
That was in Boston.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll go one step back from there. I was living and working in Atlanta for a huge corporation that was over 7,000 employees. And that was kind of when I felt like, man, I would really love, I've always wanted to be in the entrepreneurial space. I've always wanted to work for a startup. I wanted to learn. So that kind of prompted me to move up to Boston. There's a number of reasons for that. But my brother is an entrepreneur who's had some success there. And I thought, I'll just dive in. So that involved working for one more mature startup that unfortunately, as a lot of people who work in the space can realize, like didn't go the way they wanted. They had to make some layoffs. And so then I just kind of went about like, how do I find my next opportunity? And there was a number of co-working spaces in Massachusetts. I just kind of set up shop in one of them, the Cambridge Innovation Center. And I tried to meet other startups that are entrepreneurs that needed assistance. And I found one that was a nutrition company by the name of Anchor Nutrition. It was a anti-nausea nutrition bar.
Oh, wow.
and basically helped him shore up marketing efforts and help sell the company to another startup in the form of Pink Stork, which is a pregnancy and maternity focused brand. So that was it was a crash course, like 1 year. You go from having a ton of structure to you have zero structure.
Yeah.
So it was an insanely educational experience in a lot of ways. But I think one of the core things that it taught me was what's exciting and terrifying about this whole space is on a daily basis, whatever you do or don't do is going to greatly impact the company in a way that is not going to be felt at like a 7,000 person organization. So I think it made me feel more ownership of things and have a larger picture of, if I had only been in marketing up until that point, like, now you're seeing every side of the equation. And even if you are mostly focused on one of those, you need to know how all of this stuff intersects as it relates to your business. And so that was a great experience. Again, I didn't retire from it. So that's it was a learning experience.
Which isn't the only marker of success.
Of course. But I mean, in some respects, I find, so I don't want to be disingenuous. Like, well, we had a successful exit. I guess we did. But at the same time, it was more of a, it was a clean exit. I would say that. But that was a great experience, and I kind of caught the bug from it, and so that's what led me to want to work for Mass Challenge. In between those two things, and again, I'm sorry to talk about myself so much, but
no, this is what it's about.
There was there's a number, Boston, again, it's a mature ecosystem. So in addition to there being tons of startups and tons of startup support organizations, there's almost an ancillary market too for educational components, similar to the Carolina Code School and things of that nature. There's something called Startup Institute. I don't believe it exists anymore, but their whole focus was if you want to work for a startup or if you need to improve your skills to do so, it was like a 10-week crash course in that and trying to help you network and build up some of those skills that kind of is an unwritten rule that all entrepreneurs would be, they would need to do. Yeah. And so that was kind of how I got my position at Mass Challenge, but just kind of staying in the mix and going to events and signing up for programs was what one of my main takeaways from all that too, of how to find, success, if you want to call it that.
What was the biggest shock to your system going from, huge Atlanta company to
the grass is always greener, right? I mean, it's like one of those things where if something is very slow or a large corporate entity, it's just there's more process and there's more red tape and things of that nature. So in some respects, it was a relief. But I think as a shocker is realizing a lot of people don't have it figured out. Even people that seem like they do, a lot of people are building the plane as they fly it. And so to a certain extent, you should be comfortable with that, but you're also trying to figure out, how do I do this better or differently than others? And so I think the biggest shock for me was, in some respects, learning that I could, or like I had more to offer than I thought, but it was also, it was a shock in the sense of like, man, I got a lot to learn. Yeah. And so I view all of this as an effort towards, you're slowly adding to your repertoire of like, how can I help? In my particular position, how can I help a startup? But maybe if you're an entrepreneur, it's about, okay, well, this startup didn't go perfectly. What did I learn from this? So that the next endeavor, whether it's something that I do or something I join, I can bring that to the equation, and so we can avoid pitfalls. Because that's really like all this is people sharing stuff that they don't normally share, and then you can help each other. So. Yep.
But did you feel like there were any particular challenges that you faced just personally in that co-founder role?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I told you before we started filming, I tend to have bad imposter syndrome. I tend to operate from a standpoint of, gosh, there's got to be somebody who's more of an expert on this than I am.
I can relate to this.
And that might be true, but I think what you have to get comfortable with is, even if you only know 1% more than another person in the room, it's almost your responsibility to act as the expert, not to be the bully.
Oh, that's a cool way to
say
that.
But just to say, okay, well, no one else knows, and you need to chime up and say what you think you can do. And so that's something that's taking me like my whole career to become more and more comfortable with. And I'm still not there, but I'm getting a little bit closer. And I think that's been one of the more rewarding aspects of coming back to Greenville, is that there's a lot of insanely educated and successful people here, but not as many that maybe have seen startup ecosystems in other cities, in other regions. So just even if I know that 1% more, how can I help a startup here? How can I help another organization here? How did Mass Challenge do it versus someone else? Not that we're copying them. It's just I do think in the realm of there are certain things that we are taught to like not share, and we keep close to our chest about like our successes and failures, and if you're a startup, like, well, I don't want to share my idea because someone's going to steal it. But the reality is that it's hard to start a business. I'm not saying go share all of your secrets, but at the same time, entrepreneurs can learn a lot from each other. And I think that that's a key component as well as share your journey, share what you're working on, what you're not succeeding at, because you never know that you might be with somebody who's like, oh, I know exactly how to do that.
Yeah.
I actually went through that like a year ago. It was a pain, and here's how we fixed it.
Is there any go-to advice that you find yourself giving entrepreneurs as part of the next?
Yeah, I mean, so far, and for what it's worth, again, it's I'm only 4 months in, so it's fresh. But I have met, at this point with probably 40 plus startups and I would say entrepreneurs, and kind of learning about what they're going through, and that's been kind of all across. Some of those are as early stage as it's just an idea, and some of them are already, they have employees already. Mm. If I had like one piece of advice, I mean, I think. This is going to sound weird, and this is more of a relation to other cities, but a lot of people don't have a pitch deck yet. They don't have an not everyone's going to raise money down the road, but I think it's a helpful exercise to go through and kind of create that traditional, I always hate mentioning the show like Shark Tank, but you should be able to pitch your business and have it in a compelling story that highlights not just what the problem is and what the solution is, which is your company, and you're setting up that natural story, but why you yourself are unique to solve this problem.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I think there's a cool personal story that a lot of people leave out because they're so focused on, oh, this investor's only giving me this much time.
Right.
They only want to see these things, which is usually what they say, but they also want to know, like, are you passionate about this? Are you going to stay committed to this? Are you the person to solve this because of some personal or emotional reason? I think I like to try to reinforce that, encourage people as they're working on their presentations or if they're creating one from scratch. Yeah. I describe it as like a U shape for a story where you're starting off with the salient information that's going to be the through line of the business, but that little dip in that U is you. It's you're describing why this, like people love hearing that stuff of like, I encountered the problem and I asked for the solution and it didn't exist, so I made it. And that's that element there where you can kind of share your own personal reason.
Yeah, and even when you're not raising money, that's a cool idea.
I think it's just, you never know when you're going to have to pitch your business, and some of that stuff will then later on become sales material or other stuff that that you should have it in mind anyways.
Yeah, great point.
That I'm sure a number of entrepreneurs could benefit from.
Right. Helps clarify the vision too. It's hard to, sometimes you have so many different thoughts to wrangle in.
Yeah. And it's like you haven't taken that moment to really step back and do like a lean canvas model or something to say, this is who we are. Right. This is what we do. Stuff that seems really simple, I don't think is always actually, pen hasn't been put to paper yet. And so it can be pretty impactful if you do put pen to paper.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. One last question to wrap us up here. So, just because our podcast is called The Founder Factor, we have to ask, in your opinion, what is the founder factor? I feel like I should make that more dramatic. There should be like a boom.
Well, that's what they'll do in post-production. Maybe they'll add a loud bass note or something, or the Netflix chime. I don't want to give you a boring answer, but I think, and I will couch this with there's going to be an explanation afterwards.
Great.
But I think like tenacity like showing up is the factor. And then what I mean when I say that is not being stubborn and refusing to pivot, because that's very important. I think one of the most important things in a business is realizing we gave it our all, but we really need to change this. Like, we started out as a web development company, but we're seeing that the real opportunity here is in app development. So we're gonna pivot. So I don't mean tenacity in the sense of I'm never going to change, but I mean, are you going to the events? Are you trying to get help? You're not relying on that as being the only source of your business's success, but there's certain entrepreneurs that I'm sure you've even had on this show where they're everywhere. You see them, like they're showing up to all the networking events. They're helping out their fellow entrepreneurs. And I have a really cool story about one of those where the person who volunteered to help another startup found the number one customer they wanted to find in that event, just from sheer happenstance of being at an event, and they got the business card they were looking for that they would never have found.
Yeah.
And it's just a numbers game of, you might have that perfect serendipitous moment where you met the exact person you needed to, but you increase your odds to do so the more you're giving and the more you're putting into it. And so I know that that's a hard endeavor. It's like, I have no time. And I'm not saying go to every possible event because, be selective about that and what makes most sense for your business, but tenacity and showing up and giving it your all, I think as cliched as that sounds, I do think that yields results because, again, it's a numbers game.
Yeah, it's cliche for a reason, right?
I guess so.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Peter.
It's my pleasure
to have you on the show.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to The Founder Factor. We'll see you next time. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your content.